6 of Freedom Bros. I am Dustin Hurst, and I'm joined tonight by Brian Allman of the Gem State Chronicle. How you doing, Brian?
I'm doing great. It's it was a beautiful sunny day in the Treasure Valley, and I don't know, it feels like spring's coming, and maybe no matter what happens at the legislature, what happens in politics, better days are ahead.
Yeah, you say that, but this is you see that meme every year that this is like false spring, and then like Winter of Doom #2 is coming. Like I don't know, maybe I'm a pessimist, but I'm not getting my hopes up on this. So, oh man. Before we get into the meat of the show tonight, actually, we should do this in just a minute. Let's do this. Greg's going to be with us tonight. Chris Boyd, the Idaho prosecutor running for Canyon County prosecutor, is with us tonight. And Ryan Spoon and Thad Butterworth are going to talk about the overthrow attempt on Dorothy Moon and how conservatives can fight back. We've got a hell of a show for you tonight. This is episode 36 with Freedom Bros. Thanks for joining us. It was a good day. Yeah, so you think I would have enough time to bring the volume down on that, because I think we've made at least 3 listeners deaf, but I just haven't had time, so I apologize to everybody.
My baby's literally sleeping next door, so I hope you don't mind that I muted it when it was playing.
I hope you mute it when I'm talking too, because that adds value too. Before we get started with Chris Boyd, who I am super excited to interview. I've never really had I've never had a prosecutor on, and like I know the law and I know like how politics works and stuff. I've never been familiar with that process, so I'm excited for tonight's discussion. But before that, Greg and I have talked, and we are going to announce a major move with Freedom Bros. We are going to officially adopt Brian Allman as Freedom Bro #3, so he can stop being Step Bro, and he is going to be Freedom Bro #3 for the show moving forward. We think that Brian adds a ton of insight, valuable reflections. I think the best word for you is you are just this like not weird, but like this sage that offers like a different viewpoint, and you have a unique ability to pull back from what's going on from the day-to-day events and like put things in the bigger picture. And I think Greg and I we just like to freaking like punish people, so and have those fights. So official Brian Allman, welcome to being a Freedom Bro and not a Step Bro.
This is unironically the greatest honor of my life.
I don't believe that. I mean, you have 5 kids. I mean, I feel like that's way better than this will ever be.
They're cool too.
Yeah. So in a few minutes, we're going to bring on Chris Boyd. Actually, like 2 minutes, we're going to bring on Chris Boyd. But Brian, there was a major victory at the Capitol today for conservatives that's going to be spun every which way by every party in the entire world. Can you tell us what happened? The library porn bill, Freedom Bro #3, I like it. The library porn bill that was crafted by Jeff Schroeder, of all people, who doesn't think there's actually a problem with porn and explicit materials in libraries, and Jaron Crane failed in the Idaho Senate, and all of us conservatives cheered. Can you tell us the background there before we get to Chris?
Well, I mean, where do you want to start? 3 years ago, they came up with House Bill 666, which simply removes the exception to the prohibition against giving children materials that are harmful to minors. Teachers and librarians are exempted from rules that would otherwise give a store owner or just a random stranger on the street, a hefty jail term. That failed, didn't even get through the Senate, got put in Patty Ann Lodge's drawer. And then they came back the next year with another bill that got killed in House Ed. So they came back again with another bill last year that went through State Affairs. That made it. That actually passed the legislature. The governor vetoed it, and the veto override failed by 1 vote. So this year, Representative Crane comes back with another bill. It goes in there, and it looks like it's going to sail through. It's got a lot of support. And then inexplicably, it gets pulled on the day it was supposed to be debated in the House. And then they come out a few weeks later with a compromise bill between Crane and Schroeder. And this bill, it adds a bunch of layers. I can see why people are, upset with it. Senator Herndon had some interesting comments on the Senate floor this morning about the problems that it would bring. Ron Nate, in his testimony in Senate State Affairs a few weeks ago, pointed out that it essentially codifies a much looser definition of what materials harmful to minors really are, because our statute has 2 sections that explain what is harmful to minors, whereas this bill only references one of them. And so it would essentially codify that the books that may or may not be harmful to minors can only be judged by that one section, which I see what they were trying to do, because that's the section that's been adjudicated in the Supreme Court, and they're trying to make it SCOTUS proof, I guess. But anyway, what it did is you ended up with a bill that the Democrats still wouldn't accept. 6 of the 7 Senate Democrats voted against it because they don't want any oversight over what's going on in libraries and schools. They want to be able to have their librarians give children whatever with no consequences. But it was too watered down for the conservatives. The conservatives voted against it. The Freedom Caucus voted against it. And that added up to 18 votes. And so it failed 17-18 this morning in the Senate, or I think it was just after this afternoon. I wasn't able to see the debate. I was setting up for Capitol Clarity with our bro Greg, and but I saw people start talking about it.
Shows up for that.
It was surprising, but hopefully now they can get a stronger bill through, because I think there is a possibility, maybe not this year, but I think people know something has to be done. And when it's explained exactly what is in these libraries and schools, people know that something needs to be done. I've seen way too many pictures of some of these books when Anna Miller, who was with Idaho Freedom Foundation, was publishing exposés of what they were actually finding in West schools.
Super gross.
It was my job to, format the pictures and put them on the article. And I saw way too many things I can never erase.
I hope you got hazard pay for this. Okay, I want to move on, but I want to make one note. Conservatives, this is why we lose, right? This is why we lose. Stop working with people who don't agree with you, who don't believe. How in the world, Jared, I don't know if it's naivete, which it shouldn't be, because Jared has a mentor in the house and his big brother. Do not work with Jeff Schroeder on anything. He is a liberal, an atheist liberal who doesn't believe anything conservative in his body. Nothing. Stop working with him. Stop doing this, people. Anyway, there's more to say. We'll get back to that in a little bit. Right now, I am excited, and I have to disclose a couple things before we bring on Chris Boyd. To be clear, this show is for the May primary, primarily, but also for politics and informing people or whatever. We have invited anybody, any candidate who wants to come on, right, left, Democrat, Republican, socialist, whatever. Chris has accepted an invite to come on the show. And I want to be clear, Chris is a friend of mine. We actually lived in a ward together in Middleton, Idaho, about 8 years ago. We were in the same ward. We attended the same meetings, et cetera, et cetera. So that I want to disclose that. He never came to my bro night, so when I did it with the ward, we'll talk about that in a little bit. But also, he has like 400 kids, so that might be why. But I also donated. I made my second ever political donation. It was like $50, but because I want to be transparent with the crowd, I did donate. So there you go. With that disclosure in mind, I want to bring on Chris Boyd, who has the nicest beard, maybe second nicest beard we've ever had on the show. So Chris Boyd, welcome to Freedom Bros.
Oh, thanks, Dustin. I love that introduction. I never went to your bro night.
Yeah, you never went to our. So we did.
Sorry, man. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no,
we have like a million kids.
Yeah,
or 5.
Like a million.
Yeah, but they were young then too. Yep. So now that was pretty crazy times.
Yeah. No, Chris, like I said, Chris is a good man. Really good family, good kids. It was fun to be in that ward with him. It was weird because Middleton was weirdly political at that time. I lived there. Greg Pruitt lived a mile from us. Tom Muzz lived there. You live there. Doug Robertson is still there. Like, it was this weirdly political ward. And I don't think you and I actually ever talked politics when we lived in the ward. Which,
one time at Doug's house, right? One time at Doug's house.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
Came up, and I'm not even sure if we really agreed,
Yeah. So, all right, Chris, before we get into the race, the dynamics of what you're doing, your career, I want to know, who are you? What's your background? And why do you think that you are qualified to serve as Canyon County prosecutor, which is a huge job and an important one because people's lives are affected by almost every decision you make. So give us your backstory and your qualifications.
Okay, well, I don't want to give you a whole biography or anything too nuts, but I grew up in Marsh Valley, Idaho. My parents, Idaho parents, but I was actually born in Germany because I was born abroad while my dad was serving in the army. And so then we came back, and I went to high school and that in Marsh Valley, and that's in southeastern Idaho. For those of you who don't know, um, I I always kind of worshipped my dad because he was such a cool guy, and he ran around in his army green. So I was just dumb enough to join the Army Guard myself, of course, at age 17. And that was a deep part of my life for a long time. I stopped and went on like a 2-year mission to Chile in the middle of that and learned Spanish and that kind of thing, and came back and got married while I was going to Utah State University, met Laura, who's awesome. And then I left her and our brand new baby, like literally in the NICU. So he's premature. He's born in the NICU. Left him in the NICU to go to Iraq. So yeah, that was rough, man.
Wow.
So
And you're still married after that.
yeah,
That
it's
speaks
amazing.
to the
She hung in
character
for
of
a
your
year.
wife.
Yeah, isn't that crazy? Yeah, she hung in for a year on her own, and that was our first kid too. So, um, so but so a year in Iraq, that was a pretty interesting year, and I don't know that at that point in my college level that I was thinking about being a prosecutor yet, but there was something that was deeply missing out of Iraq, which was there's no real respect for rule of law, and what that means in a real sense is that if someone freaking does something bad to your family, your recourse is to go get violent with them or their family, and that's just what happens. That's just what you
Right.
do, right? You
Right.
just go. You're upset about something that happened to you. You go beat the crap out of the guy's dad or sister or whatever else, and then this cycle keeps going on. So that was always kind of in the background. I went and did a master's degree back east in the east side of or in Washington D.C. at Johns Hopkins University. It was in economics and then I went. Actually, we did a year in Italy, so we've been kind of all over the place.
Goodness gracious.
A year of that was on that, and then I ended up going to law school after that. We came back to Idaho to do that, and by that point, I knew that I wanted to be a prosecutor. Right? I'd watched enough Law and Order that I kind of thought that was cool, and I go to law school, and law school is like the worst experience. It's just you're spending all this money on it, and you're just like, what is this garbage what is this? So I'm just completely demoralized. And the between your years of you can be an intern, and so they let me be a limited license intern after my second year, and I went up to actually Sandpoint of all places, and I was a city prosecutor intern doing like people's traffic tickets and stuff.
Oh, fun.
but I loved it. I loved talking to people. I loved kind of yeah, just being the voice of reason, between you and the cops, sometimes between people. And I all of a sudden was like, this is it. I'm okay. This is my life's calling. I got this. And I got a job right out of law school at the Canyon County Prosecuting Attorney's Office, and that's where I started. That's where I got that's where I was born as a prosecutor, if you will. That's where I really did all of my work. I know all of the long termers anyway. The police. It's funny because I've been in this campaign. I've been going around and talking to people from Nampa PD, from obviously from CCSO, Canyon County Sheriff's Office, and Caldwell PD. And these are people that like I know them, and it's like when you work in a murder case together, you have a bond. Step over a body together, and now you're friends. So, but it's cool to run into these people that we've fought so hard for justice with. And they're really just happy, I think, to see that I'm running, that I'm doing this. And so why am I running? I kind of always knew that I wanted to do this, and Brian Taylor's not running again, and so the time is right, and so I came down from Adams. I didn't leave because I hated it. After I got done with about 5 years there, I went up to Adams County and became their elected prosecutor. So I've actually done this job. I think that you're not gonna find many people who have done the job. I've done it at a smaller county, of course, but you're not going to find anybody who's more prepared. I tried a lot of jury trial cases. I've gone. It's not for prosecutors. The thing that we do is jury trials, right? That go into in front of juries, arguing cases. I've done everything from the smallest traffic infractions to murder cases, all the way through jury trial and sentencing, and just everything that you can do. I've done that, and so I'm qualified to do it. But more than anything, I think that and that's one thing. You got to have the competence, right? That's the bar one. Like you've got to have competence, right?
Well, hang on. That
Yeah.
that lady from Georgia shows us that's absolutely not
Oh
true.
gosh. Well, but that's and her competence might be in question, especially considering like what her choices and her actions with her boyfriend.
Well, and putting her dress on backwards on the trial
Oh
day,
my
like
goodness.
I don't know.
Yes, but that's a great idea or a great point of how you want people to be competent. How about that? And the moral. So the other thing is look, you got to have a moral compass to do this job. You've got to have good um, good common sense, but also kind of a willingness and a moral courage to stand up behind what's right. I think I have a proven track record of doing that. I think that the Canyon County voters will agree with me that I have a track record of standing up for what's right when it's hard. Most of the time, what I do is go get bad guys, right? And interface with police, and sometimes have to turn down cases because sometimes I'm the voice of reason, right? Or that's what I should be anyway, right? That's what the prosecutor should be, is the voice of reason. A lot of times people don't realize that we actually do dismiss cases, that we do turn down cases, and that it's a regular part of our job.
Right.
But it's also important that you're good law enforcement partners, and all that. But I guess that's the primary thing that a prosecutor does, is work cases, right? And I've got the experience to work those cases and do those things. But every once in a while, every once in a blue moon, something comes up that really requires some moral backbone, and that's when you find out that your prosecutor and your sheriff really are some of the most important people to your personal freedom as an American citizen.
Right.
And yeah, go ahead.
I want to stop you for just a second there.
I could go on. Look at me just going.
Darn politicians talking. Yeah, just kidding. I understand this. Brian, do you want to? I have a couple questions, but I always talk way too much. Brian, do you have some questions for Chris that you want to start out with?
Some of my questions, I'm sure, are your questions as well. But I guess what brought you up to Adams County, and now what made you decide to come back to Canyon at this time? Besides just the fact that the office is now vacant.
So
he knew that there was going to be an In-N-Out built in the valley. I think that's just kidding.
Yes, no, he got it. I'm after the hamburgers. So in let's see here, in 2018, I had left the Canyon County Prosecuting Attorney's office, and I don't really want to talk about the reasons I left, other than I'm glad that I did, and I really couldn't stand being a mercenary attorney, and I tried that for a while. You can make a lot of money doing it, and I'm not dissing on anybody who decides to do it, but it is not the kind of work that I feel drawn to. So I began looking for prosecuting work pretty much soon after leaving there, and Adams County had an opening as the elected prosecutor, and I've always been a country boy, so it's no problem living in the country. And so I went up and I moved up to Adams County, and that's where I've been ever since, until recently, when I was told that Brian Taylor was not going to be running again. And I own a home in Canyon County for 6-7 years. I've lived probably more in Canyon County than anywhere else in my life. So, I mean, it's all relative in terms of how much roots a person can have. I've lived all over the place so much, but Canyon County is my home as much as anywhere else. And so it's some place that, especially when you're talking about the office, the institution, the police officers, those people are, they're people I know, they're people I care about, and I know they need someone good right now. So they're in trouble. I think they need some help.
you talked about the rule of law a lot, and I know that I've seen your Facebook posts, your Twitter posts, stuff like that. The rule of law is something that I believe in, but there's also always that human element. As long as something is enforced by humans and regulated by humans, there is that human element. We can talk about the rule of law all day, but the truth is, Idaho code gives a prosecutor a lot of discretion as to what you said, which is you can keep cases, pursue them, or you can dismiss them and move on. Right. A mutual friend of ours a couple years ago was it working in a prosecuting office, and he didn't give me the details of the case as far as names, case numbers, stuff like that. But he texted me. He's like, "Hey, there's this thing, and I don't know what to do. What would you do?" And I'm like, "Well, first of all, I'm not an attorney, so don't do this." But we talked about the case in generic terms. And I'm curious, like, that's an awesome responsibility for any prosecutor. How do you, using your moral compass, decide which cases to prosecute and which ones to drop and let go? Because there are some, like, we're seeing the destruction of American culture in these big blue cities because nothing gets prosecuted. Nothing. How do you do it?
Well, my mentor taught me to do what feels right in your heart. Do what feels right in your heart. And you're right, man. You can't just read the rules and be like, this is it. This is not it's not robotic. There's interpretations of these laws that apply for sure. But I think there's a gut check, right? There's a gut check of what was intended by the statute, what is fair, and I mean what's fair, what's an equal way to enforce the law. What would someone else get in some similar circumstances, regardless of whatever bias you try to get rid of as much bias as you can. One of the beautiful things about Canyon County or something a place like that is that you can bounce ideas off of other prosecutors and people from different political or different kind of cultural backgrounds, and you can kind of push the ideas off of each other. It's really interesting. The spanking cases, right? Okay, so there's a point.
Hang on, hang on.
Yeah.
That literally was what our mutual friend texted me about, was a spanking case. So
Yeah.
I'm very interested in what you say now.
Yeah, no, I mean, spanking cases are interesting because injury to child, right, is a pretty nebulous term, and it's interesting to see how many different prosecutors have different views on what constitutes what's over the line, what is child abuse versus what's acceptable discipline, right? And I grew up in a house where we get spanked and we spank, So for me, this was not like a real for me, it was weird that people were freaking out about this. I remember showing my kids, my brothers, my bloody bottom, at one point. And that actually, it's funny because other people would say that, dude, you were abused, and I'm like, well, I mean, maybe, but it wasn't that day. I didn't feel like it was that. Um, but it's funny because it's our personal experiences really inform that, and
Right.
sometimes we have those that just really gives us different views on it. And so I think that you need to reflect the views of the majority of your voters, right? And that means that you should have generally the same morality levels that they do. Does that make sense? I'm not sure it's not a clear cut answer in terms of how do we deal with spanking cases. Well, for me, it had to be bad enough that it shocks me, right? Like if I see like it's bloody bottom stuff, and there's handprint,
Right.
it when you see. For me, it's like I know it when I see it.
Exactly. I was going to bring that up. You can't define pornography, but you know when you see it, and sometimes it is that gut instinct on what you feel, the pictures, the interviews, stuff like that, and you can say, okay, it's let's
Mhm.
let's move. So
And
that's
Justin,
interesting.
don't forget that ultimately it's going to be a jury of 12 that decides, right? I mean,
Right.
if they disagree and if the defense disagrees and doesn't want to plead guilty, obviously, then you're going to trial and 12 Canyon County jurors will decide. And that's informative. I think that listen, if you don't have the jury trial experience to do this job, then you might not realize that you're taking people to trial or charging people out of sync with what the voters, and I say voters, but what the citizens, what the jurors would actually do. Like you have to have a good sense of this is what the jurors in Canyon County, Idaho expect, right?
Right.
And that way you have trust. And I mean, you do that, and you don't overcharge. You don't go nuts on things that are on the edge, and then you end up with a little bit of trust with the juries, or you should.
Along those lines, I don't know how much you want to speak to specific legislation, but there's been a lot of debate over the fentanyl bill. It's a House bill. It's passed both, or it's a passed both chambers. It's sitting on the governor's desk right now. Would establish mandatory minimum sentences for fentanyl possession and defines possession by the threshold of detectable fentanyl in a substance. But beyond the specifics of that, what it does is it shifts power from the judges and juries to prosecutors and police. Because if you decide to charge someone under that statute, then if they're convicted, then the judge's hands are tied and he has to sentence them to whatever is the minimum in the statute. What are your thoughts on that generally? Kind of at a high level, the relationship between prosecutors and police and judges and juries, and also if you want to go into the realm of mandatory minimums, or maybe just leave that one alone.
No, that's fair. No, that's a good question. Without getting too specific about that bill, I'm actually happy to talk about mandatory minimums and kind of my view on that. I think that they're kind of a blunt instrument, and let me explain what I mean by that. They're trying to solve a problem in a very blunt instrument kind of way. And what's the problem? The problem is that we need to get dangerous offenders off the streets. And what I mean by dangerous offenders, I'm talking about dealers at high levels, cartel level dealers. And we need ways to keep them off the streets because, Brian, that's where a lot of the crime comes from. I mean, a lot of the organized crime. And that stuff does happen in Canyon County, is a real problem. And we have to have ways of putting them away. Okay. So that's the problem you're trying to solve. But you're doing it in a very blunt force instrumenty kind of way, right? And that, of course, the danger is that you can sweep up people who happen to have a cousin who's in the cartels or whatever, and one day they decide to, or they have a pound of methamphetamines and they're just some 18-year-old kid, and that's the story that you hear about. That's the story that's kind of pushed on the other side of things. And I think those are fair concerns as well. But I guess my preference is for. Are you familiar with the federal system at all in terms of sentencing guidelines?
Not super familiar.
So what? And I don't want to give the federal system any credit at all because feds, but
because feds, that's a good life excuse.
Dude. Well, feds. Dude, I mean, lately they do not have a good track record of being cool, man. But one thing that they did get right was, I think, this sentencing guidelines, because you have a problem where people do not get consistent sentences. Hi, Greg.
Greg, be quiet.
People don't get consistent sentences.
Can you guys hear me?
Greg, be quiet. All right, keep going. I've sent a message behind the scenes. Sorry about that.
All right. So in the state of Idaho, you might end up with on a certain kind of charge. You can end up with, I mean, let's say you beat the crap out of somebody, right? Aggravated battery, and
okay, sounds good.
You permanently altered their face. Okay, that's it. And it's an aggravated battery charge. Okay.
Yep.
You might go in front of a judge who's like, well, I don't really care about this, and you're going to get probation. And that would be a judge who's like really, and let's just say I don't want to use any names, but let's just say it's a judge in Canyon County. You go and you commit your friend commits the same exact crime, but he does it in Pocatello. And Bannock County judge is really offended by this. You have the exact same criminal history, and you end up going to prison for 10 years. And I think that's a real problem. That's solved with not solved, but that's greatly mitigated by guidelines. And those guidelines are created out of more than just the crime. You look, they have an entire book essentially printed. It's a point system, and it works essentially by taking people's criminal histories into account, taking people's like their drug histories into account, taking their attitudes with law enforcement in terms of what they did afterwards, whether they took accountability, and those are given a certain number of points. My point is just that at that point you get a range, both a minimum and maximum, and you end up with more fair sentences. It's not a blunt force; it's an instrument. It's an instrument that actually does the job because you're given the ability to put away the bad guys that are really bad because they tend to have corresponding, other indicators, and those people go away for a very long time, and then the people who you're really worried about, they don't, right, or they don't tend to, and they're guidelines, so the judge can depart from them for good reason, but he has to make some specific findings and things like that. So that was probably a longer way of explaining that, but that's my preference to a mandatory minimum system. How about that? I prefer the federal system. Yeah. But
Education.
this is all you're going to give us as prosecutors. I'm definitely look, man. I got to put away bad guys, and I'm going to get those bad guys put away. And this is the best system I got right now. I really wish that Idaho would look at doing a guideline system. I think that would be better overall.
We've got about 10 minutes left with Chris. And I want to talk about the thing that kind of put him on my radar, politically speaking. We all remember the horrors and the annoying petty tyranny, of COVID, right? I think that the most annoying thing for me was I tried to take my kids to the park one day, and all the basketball hoops were down. Like they literally took the backboards were still up, but the actual hoop was off because Mayor McLean could not have us outside playing basketball, even if we were socially distanced. But there was one prosecutor in the entire state of Idaho who said, "Hey, Brad Little, this stay-home order that you issued that you later said that the guy pretended he didn't make us stay home." We'll get into that later. But there's one prosecutor who said, "I'm not going to enforce this decision. I'm not going to help you with your petty tyranny." Chris, can you talk to us about that decision and how because here's the thing. I understand politics. I understand like Brad can't do anything to you, but down the road, he can handicap you or kneecap you maybe in a re-election bid or an election bid. How did you come to that decision, and how did you find that moral courage to do that? Because no other prosecutors did. None. Zero.
Well, isn't that interesting, right? And I was actually shocked by that, Dustin, and maybe I shouldn't have been. I think maybe I lived in a naive bubble until that moment, and I really believed that I mean, honestly, I thought that pretty much every other prosecutor in the state would probably be interested in that, but that's not. Okay, so first of all, I should point out that the real problem from my perspective as a prosecutor was not that not just that he ordered it, but that he asked prosecutors to criminally enforce it. And he cited to a statute related to health and welfare, wherein you could charge someone with a misdemeanor, essentially for kind of for disobeying kind of a quarantine style order, right? And it was wildly out of whack with what could have been done, and with no exemptions at the time for any sort of you couldn't go to church according to this order. You couldn't assemble for political reasons according to this order. There were no exceptions whatsoever. And you just listen, man. We took an oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States and of Idaho. We took an oath, and I mean, it wasn't really a question. I mean, for me, what I had to do, and I didn't do it. And look, man, I'd rather stay out of the politics of this. I mean, I'm not in the fight with Brad Little, and I wish I didn't ever have to be. But the fact of the matter is anyone, whether it was Brad Little or Dustin Hurst, if he wasn't sitting in that governor's chair and did something that was as blatantly as unconstitutional as that, I would feel obligated to stand up and say no. And it's funny because I talked to a few prosecutors about this. I'm not going to name any names, but I talked to some about this. They discouraged me from doing it. They told me I was going to commit political suicide, and maybe they're right, But at the end of the day, dude, I got 5 kids. You got kids. What kind of world are we going to leave for our families, right? For our kids, because all this is just temporary.
Yeah. No, and that was super admirable. In fact, there were two attorneys that really stood out to me during that time. It was you and Edward Dendinger here in Boise, because there was a case that we actually exposed um, up in Rathdrum, North Idaho area, and there was a family. Their father-in-law or father had just died, and this family, this couple with a little kid, they were tasked with liquidating his assets, and he was apparently a hoarder. And so he had like 3 long, um, the boxes. Anyway, he had tons of crap. So they held yard sales every weekend. They'd hold yard sales to get rid of dad's hoarding crap, and they got charged under Brad Little's stay home order. And Edward went to bat for them and did their case pro bono and got it dismissed because it was the stupidest charge in the history of ever in Idaho, probably. So kudos to you and Edward for stepping up during COVID when very few other attorneys, very few other politicians did it. It was impressive work to see. Did you? I mean, I am curious because we've never really circled back on this. Were there any political? And you don't have to blow anybody out of the water, but was there any backlash for you or political consequences, if you will?
I would say those are ongoing, Dustin.
Okay, that's a fair answer.
Yeah,
grudges are held for a long time. I have a few. So.
Brian. Well,
go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say, politically speaking, what's an opponent going to do? Go tell the voters that you stood up for them and their rights to assemble and, live?
Oh, and isn't it great? Like a couple years later, right? Like, they told me, I had people telling me, you're going to kill everyone in your county. I'm like, I didn't tell him he can't issue an advisory. If he wants to advise everyone to stay home, please stay home, guys. He's welcome to do that. He just can't say you're going to jail. If you're going to use the power of the state, you're going to jail unless you listen to my stay home order. You can't go to church. No, the Constitution is a limit on what we can do as a government. And he knows that. I mean, he knows that, right? And what kills me is that if Raul Labrador had been our attorney general, that never would have happened. Never would have happened. And I don't think that it would have been egg on Brad Little's face either. I think that Raul would have gone to him, would have said, "Hey, man, you can't do this. I'm not going to let it happen." And he never would have done it. And guess what? It would have been fine. I mean, it was a serious look. I'm not depreciating the seriousness of what happened. And there was some serious people got sick. It's true. It happened. Okay. But in terms of your ability, I mean, we could have had something far, far, far more grave, and you still don't have magically the powers of government to do that. This is a limitation on what government is allowed to do. And so if you want to tell the people to stay home, you need to advise them. Look, man, we do that with blizzards all the time, right? Blizzards are going to kill you, right? Like, stay home. They're very dangerous. And when they say stay home, most of us stay home. And if they don't, then they die in the damn blizzard.
If the government establishes a precedent that, for a certain emergency, they can confine you to your home, close down your business, shut down your churches, then they're just going to start finding new emergencies whenever they want to do stuff like that.
Brian, they're already doing that. And they never get the power back, right? So if you don't fight them, and that's kind of why I felt obligated to say it and to fight it, as opposed to just being, some of the other prosecutors that I talked to were like, "Hey, we're just not going to charge it." And I thought, well, that's good, but that's not good enough, because we have to fight it. We have to stand up and say, no, this isn't acceptable. All of us need to say that, because if we don't, this could happen again.
Yep. All right, Chris, it's been a pleasure having you on. Thank you for staying up late for us. Again, I know you have responsibilities at home, and I appreciate your time. So in exchange for your time, you get to make a campaign pitch to our audience. Tell them where they can find you, where they can donate, anything else you want to tell them that you want them to know about your campaign.
Well, that's awesome. Thanks. BoydGetsJustice.com. BoydGetsJustice.com. I'm not funded by big donors. I'm funded by normal people. I'm just a normal working guy. You want somebody who's going to work hard, someone who's going to be honest, someone who's going to be competent at the job, but who truly cares. You vote for Chris Boyd.
Awesome. Chris, thank you again, and good luck with the campaign. I know I don't want to talk about your potential foe because he hasn't announced, but I do know that good people in your county are already lining up behind you. Brian Lenny has endorsed. A number of other people I trust are lining up to endorse you. Go get them. Good luck.
Thanks, Dustin.
Appreciate
Thanks, Brian. It's a good time.
so often, Brian, and I think you and I kind of experience this dysphoria, if you will. I hate that term right now, but about politicians who want power, who aren't honest, who are ambitious, who don't stand, have zero moral principles. And every once in a while, you find that one who bucks the trend. I think, and again, this could change, but I think Chris Boyd bucks the trend, and I'm really excited for the people of Canyon County to have him as as a prosecutor if he wins in May. What do you think?
I don't know him as well as you do. I met him for the first time just last month at the winter meeting. But just listening to him talk tonight, he reminds me of a Thomas Massey or Rand Paul sort who wants to get into government to stop government from infringing on our rights rather than get in there and aggrandize himself or wield power over other people, which I think a lot of people do.
Yeah. No, I think there are a lot of people who, the big knock on Raul Labrador when he was in Congress, and I'll be clear, I think Raul is another one of these types who never compromises, never sells out his values. But the big knock on Raul from people like my brother was, hey, he never passed a bill. Cool. That's fine with me because and plug your ears for this one, Brian. Raul was instrumental in tanking Obamacare Light that Trump and the senator from Louisiana wanted, right? Raul and the Freedom Caucus helped stop that from happening. Chris is a guy who understands it's not necessarily about what the government does for you. It's about stopping the bad things that it can't do to you. And it did. I mean, to stand up, I caught a lot of. I kind of felt for him a little bit of empathy toward the end where he was talking about his stance in the COVID era, because we at IFF did a when McLean took the basketball hoops down, we did COVID dodgeball at a park in Boise, and you have no idea how many people called our office and said, you're going to kill everybody there. And I said, I'm not forcing them to come. I'm not forcing them to come. And, dodgeballs were socially distant. You don't play next to each other. So it's lame if you do. So I think he's courageous, and if his foe is who we think it is, the choice is night and freaking day. So,
and I just wanted to say that who you elect as prosecutor can make a huge difference. It was a prosecutor, an elected prosecutor in Wisconsin, who charged Kyle Rittenhouse in a very clear case of self-defense and put his life through hell for 2 years. And he was only acquitted because, the judge cracked down on some of their shenanigans, and the jury, it was a good jury, a
Right.
different jury, and it might have gone very differently. He might be in prison for life right now. Fonnie Willis down in Atlanta, charging Trump and, that whole clown show. But consider all the people who, get charged for nonsense, while at the same time prosecutors in other places, just give someone a slap on the wrist for, assault or attempted murder or something, and they get out and they're right back to doing it again. So really, he was right that prosecutors are one of our first lines of defense for our society, both for safety, law and order, but also for upholding the rule of law and the Constitution and our civil rights. So it's an important choice that often goes overlooked when you're looking at the people on your ballot.
Yeah, I do wonder. I mean, and there's a bill in the Idaho legislature about pedophiles, right? And I saw there was a newspaper from somewhere across the country I saw today, and the person, there were two headlines, and the first one was, person gets 25 to life for assault, and then there was like sexual assault was like 1 year or 2 years or whatever, and I was like, I wonder how Chris Boyd feels about wood chipper goes. Burp. I'll have to bring him on another time to ask about that. But look, the other candidate, I'll say it. The other candidate we think is going to run that has been shopping around for endorsements is Greg Cheney, who is one of the worst political actors in the entire sphere. If he runs Canyon County, you don't have a choice. You have to elect Chris Boyd, because you talk about somebody who's ambitious, who will cut deals, who will do all the wrong things. Greg Cheney is it. So that said, after dumping on him, Greg, you're free to come on the show if you want to. I doubt you will, but yeah, you never know. Okay, let's move on. Let's move on. Thank you again, Chris Boyd, for coming on. Okay. What was it? Tuesday night, I get a text from a friend, and it was saying, hey, there's this secretive meeting held by the GOP establishment cabal in 1 hour and 45 minutes. And I said, oh, that's fun. They're like, they're going to take over or try to take over the GOP. So a couple of friends and I mobilized, and we got a couple bodies in that meeting, much to the chagrin of my brother Ashley, Trent Clark, Tom Luna. Apparently, Trent is very upset that there was political espionage going on because he tweeted about it endlessly. So I would just say, Trent, be better at politics. Just be better. That stuff aside, the establishment cabal hates Dorothy Moon, hates her with a passion. The most conservative, her and Raul are about the same. One of the most conservative party chairs we have ever had in the history of the Idaho Republican Party, and they want to do away with her. Right? Did you've been up on this, right, Brian?
Oh yeah, I've been keeping an eye on things, and
your
obviously,
thoughts?
well, the hatred for Dorothy Moon, it goes back a long time, since before she was, back when she was just in the legislature. I've talked to people who, I mean, the lead up to the vote at the convention in 2022 in Twin Falls was a lot of mudslinging, trying to get people to not vote for her, but it didn't work. She won by an overwhelming majority. Basically it was like 3-2 ratio. I haven't done the math, but it was a tremendous majority. Whereas previous votes for chair had been 1 vote, 2 votes, 12 votes. This was 150 or something. It was insane because the grassroots saw what was going on and wanted to change. And it's like, the party establishment has not forgiven them or her for that ever since. And they've been. And the funny thing is, it's you get people like Trent Clark. I enjoy debating with him. On the issues, he's fairly conservative, but there's just something about being out of power, or something about the way that the wrong people are now in power, and that's just the worst thing ever, and it drives these people crazy. That it's like when somebody who went to the wrong school suddenly achieves a high position. It's how dare you? It's you're punching above your weight. You're a
right. Yeah. No, it's weird. I think they feel, because they've had it so long, they've had power for decades, right? They feel entitled to the power and the favors and the dinners and all the trappings of political wealth, if you will. And I think, honestly, they're dead in the water, and they just don't realize it just yet, because I think the conservative infrastructure has mobilized better than ever before, right? But also, your point is well taken. When Raul and Tom Luna went, I think it was Raul and Tom went head to head for party chair, right? Raul won by 2 votes. 2 votes. Dorothy won by 141, right? Basically, very politically aligned. And it was Luna versus Moon, and Luna got destroyed, absolutely destroyed. So I think that 1 or 2 more elections, if the conservative infrastructure continues working like we have been, they are done, absolutely done. But we got to make it happen. So to talk about that and other weird things that I like, we're gonna bring on. That was the worst intro ever. We're gonna bring on my guy Ryan Spoon, one of the top hardest working activists in all of Idaho's conservative politics. How you doing, Ryan? Oh, we can't hear you, buddy.
Am I unmuted now?
There we
I'm doing
go.
well.
All
right.
I actually prefer you on mute, but that's okay. First of all, I have to compliment you. I've been looking at your background since you joined in the studio. I love the background. That is the greatest troll move ever. So thank you for that. Okay. So Ryan, you are a player. You're very well connected in conservative politics. Talk to us about the effort to overthrow Dorothy Moon, and I guess what people need to know about that effort.
Yeah, so there is an organized effort by paid professionals to build enough grassroots support to elect precinct committeemen around the state, because those precinct committeemen are the ones that control who selects the delegates that go to the convention. that selects the party chair. So they want to control who gets to go vote. It would be like picking the legislature in advance. And that's what they're trying to set themselves up to be able to do. We're taking them seriously, but frankly, my opinion is they don't stand a chance.
Why do
They
you say
don't
that?
have the numbers because they just don't have the numbers for it. They're trying to approach this the way they would a gubernatorial campaign. They're trying to come at it with money and sophistication and texting and social media and lots of graphs and charts. But what they're missing is the personal touch. And that's what the conservatives grassroots has, is that personal touch. And when you've got almost 2 million people electing a governor, that governor candidate is not going to be able to shake hands and introduce himself to every one of those 2 million people. But when you've got a precinct committeeman that needs to get votes from anywhere from 300 to 900 Republican voters, he realistically can knock on every single door, every single Republican door in his precinct and introduce himself. And you're not even really selling politics at that point. You're selling yourself. It's a personal sell. And that's what all of Trent Clark and Tom Luna, they think that they're still going at this sophisticated to elect a gubernatorial candidate. We're not. We want grassroots neighborhood leaders, and that requires the personal touch and the passion that they sorely lack.
So before we get into the nuts and bolts and how we fight back and how we win this thing, what for those who are politically inept, I've never actually worked in party politics. I've never volunteered. I volunteered for one campaign doing like I move stuff around the state, delivering stuff. What is a precinct committeeman and what does that person do? I'm also asking because, well, that'll come up in a minute, but what is a precinct committeeman?
Yeah. So unlike an elected state official, like a House representative or a senator or even the county clerk or the governor, attorney general, those are all state elected positions. They end up working for the state independent of party affiliation. So a precinct committeeman is not a state elected official, it is a party elected official. It is part of the private organization that is the Republican Party, and they set the rules and the guidelines, and they are the stewards of the party. And I liken it a lot of times to, have you ever played a game with someone and you realized very quickly that they knew the rules much better than you did? And you could have all the raw talent and all the motivation in the world, but if you didn't know the rules of the game, you were going to get beat. And that is what has happened for a long time in Idaho, is you had the establishment that knew the rules very well. Well, COVID was the galvanizing force that caused conservatives to grow up politically. That is what caused us to say, all right, crack open this rule book. We're tired of running on passion and loud voices, and we're going to figure out how to make these rules work in our favor. And that's why Dorothy won by 150. It's why we took over the Ada County Republican Party. And across the state, there's only a handful of county parties left that are Rhino controlled. And the notion that the Rhinos could take all those back and seed the convention with enough delegates to get their Rhino candidate elected as chair instead of Dorothy, it's just ridiculous.
Brian, do you have any questions? I have a few, but I want to not talk all the time.
Oh no, go ahead, and I'll come up with something.
My first question, Ryan, is I listened to 15 minutes of the call and I had somebody on the inside the entire time, but there was never a name mentioned as an alternative to Dorothy Moon. Have you heard anybody? I have a sneaking suspicion I know who it is, but have you heard any names?
I have not, but if I were to pass a wager, it would probably be Trent Clark himself that would be the candidate. He's quite offended that all of his good old boy networks have been torn apart. He's quite offended that aspersions are cast on the old way of Idaho politics, which nobody embodies that more than he does. And he takes very personal offense to his life's work being dragged through the mud. And as we often say, well, you should have voted better. And that's his problem to deal with. I have no sympathy for him. we're going to let freedom run. So that would be my first guess, would be Trent Clark. The second guess would be Daniel Silver. He's current first vice chair. He's the only rhino on the executive committee. The regions each have their representatives to the committee. But of the officers on the executive committee, he's the only rhino left standing. So he's a logical choice. He's very silver-tongued. He's very charismatic. So I think that he would be a logical candidate as well. But this is only speculation. I have not received any inside information. I'm just putting myself in their shoes and saying, if I were to pick the strongest candidate, who would it be? And I hope they pick one of those, because both of those people are widely despised by the conservative grassroots right now. They have stuck their foot in it time and time and time again over the past 2 years. And if you think 150 votes is a landslide, it would be 3 times that if we have either one of those guys.
And I wonder, like, if they run Trent Clark, oh man, you're right. I can't think of anybody else who is more out of touch with the new Republican Party. And I think COVID, and as much as I don't like the guy, I think Trump really brought a new wave of voters who are so sick of the BS of the old Republican Party, the Bushies, the Nikki Haley types, right? Who they pretend to be Republican, and they act. It's Brad Little, right? They pretend to be Republican, but they act like Democrats. They have Medicaid expansion, they're neocons, stuff like that. The new people are no compromise. They don't take your shit. Excuse the language, but they do not take your shit at all. And that's huge, because that's who Dorothy Moon is, and that's where the Idaho Republican Party is. Now, has that trickled into our elected leadership? Not completely. Not completely. Brad Little is still there. But as far as a party, I think run Trent Clark at your own peril and at your own risk, guys. I think Silver might work, but I don't think. I think you're right. Like maybe Luna, maybe I don't know. They should run Tyler Hurst.
Well, Dustin,
at least we would have one Hearst family member in Republican Party politics that way.
Shut up. We'll talk about that in a minute. Go ahead.
No, Dustin talked about it a little bit, about the difference in the new Republican Party versus the old guard. But I want to ask you, Ryan, how do you see that playing out at the local level, at the county level, at the district level? What makes a new Republican different from an old Republican? Is it purely ideology, or is it strategy? Is it a worldview? What is it?
Yeah, I would say that the old Idaho Republicans were ranging anywhere from neoconservatives, your typical George W. Bush Republican, to outright Democrats who recognized that the path to political power in Idaho, regardless of their personal political views, was to put an R behind their name. So it is an ideological function. I think that people like Trent Clark talk conservative, but when it comes down to it, their loyalty is to money and big business. And if big business tells them that they want to fire people for not getting a vaccine, or that they want to implement racist and sexist ideologies in their hiring, then somebody like Trent Clark is going to bury whatever personal views he may have to the contrary, and he's going to kowtow to those constituents in big business, because he has been convinced in the old Republican model, the country club Republican model, that groveling before these corporations is the conservative thing to do.
It used to be Democrats were the anti-big business party. I love that the Republican Party has evolved into that, because I mean, so often part of the reason we have the immigration problem in this country is because of spineless Republicans who know that big business wants their cheap labor, right? That's a huge element here.
Yeah.
So to Ryan's last jab at me, I want to add a point. I am so
well. Before you get into that, Dustin, I'll say that not only did they used to be the party of anti-business, they used to be the party of anti-war. Where has the anti-war left gone? I really miss those guys, because we wouldn't be in all these messes overseas if we had some anti-war hippies joining up with the freedom crowd to stop it.
Yeah. I do. One of my favorite things, honestly, and it happened today, is when the wingtip caucus, the left wing and the right wing, come together to kill things that the establishment wants. It's my favorite, or push good policy. That part rarely happens, but I do love when the wingtip caucus joins to kill bad stuff. Okay, so we've made one announcement in the show, and that Brian is now Freedom Bro number 3. I'm going to make another announcement that Ryan invited me to a couple months ago, but I have just been delaying. I am actually, so I've been a registered libertarian for a couple years because I saw a party with Brad Little as the head, and I said I can't be a part of that. And I took a lot of heat. In fact, every time I complain about anything on Twitter or social media, people like Randy Jackson say, well, you're a libertarian. Why do you have an opinion on this? It's like, well, you're dumb and you have an opinion. So let's not label people. But anyway, I'm actually going to change my party affiliation to be a part of this effort to save Dorothy Moon. Do I think that I will be needed in any way, shape, or form? No. But I do think that grassroots conservatives need to absolutely do the right thing and get active to make sure that the momentum that Ryan and the other conservatives who have been organizing this stuff for years isn't lost. So, Ryan, can you talk to me now that I'm doing the right thing and you've converted me? It took years, but your missionary work paid off. How can other conservatives get involved to help to make sure that Chairwoman, Moon is reelected in June?
Yeah. So I would say the first thing is talk to us. You can look at my Twitter account. You can look at my Facebook. You can look at my political webpage. There's many ways to contact me. Anybody that knows Dustin and doesn't know me can reach out to Dustin. He has all my contact info. He can get in touch. And then once we've been connected, everyone has time or talent or treasure or a combination of those three that they are able to throw into this fight. And if your response is, no, I don't have any of those, okay, great. Go back to complaining on social media and leave the rest of us alone. Because
or
if
move
you
to
aren't really
California.
ready to contribute, if you aren't really ready to contribute one of those three, then just go back to complaining on social media and writing letters to conservative Aunt Susie on chain emails and things like that. So I think
I love the
everyone
disdain you
has
feel.
some of those.
I love that so much. No, because it's true. Because like so many of us who have been in the arena for so long, like, dude, I have so many arrows in my back I can't even count. But like, it's worth it because of the work we've been able to do to move the party to the right, which is where it should be, and to take it away from the rhinos who want to move it back to the left. Right? If all you can do is bitch on social media, like, it's time. It's
Right.
the saying I use in fundraising letters all the time is you have to meet the moment. And it's time for a lot of people to step up, turn off Netflix, go knock some doors, drop some fundraising letters, do something, meet the moment, because this is America is lost. America is completely lost. Congress is broken. Idaho is not. And if people will just get up off their butts and do something, we can save this state. Brian, do you have questions about this effort to save Chairman Moon and the conservative movement?
Well, I don't have many questions. So it's been, something obviously I've been watching for a couple of years. You mentioned, what a precinct committeeman does. How does one go about becoming one? Or if you already have a good one in your precinct, I mean, first of all, what is a precinct?
Yeah.
And then second of all, how do you become a precinct committeeman? And if you've already have a good one in your precinct, how do you support them?
Yeah. And I first want to point out how that ties into the weakness of the rhinos that are fighting against us. They have spent so long chasing after titles and not wanting to actually do the work. They just want to have the prestige and the name tag. And we are completely the opposite. I don't care what title you have. I want to know if you're going to do the work. And once I find out you're going to do the work, there are plenty of titles to go around. I have a great precinct committee woman, and I'm her alternate. And I then am available to be the first vice chairman of the Ada County Republican Party. So there are titles aplenty to go around if you feel that you need a title to go along with it. But the most valuable title you can have is Republican Party volunteer. So the next point I want to make is the I can't talk tonight. Timeliness of your question, Brian. March 4th through the 15th is the filing window for precinct committeemen to run in the primary in May. So the May primary is May 21st. There are 10 weekends between March 15th and May 21st. So find out how many Republican voters you've got on that precinct, divide it by 10, hit every single door, and you will win. It's really that simple. Because dollars to donuts, the rhinos are not putting in the work. If you put in the work, you will win. And then a precinct committeeman goes to monthly meetings, supports Republican candidates, gets involved in those rules that I talked about, become an expert as much as possible in how the function of government works so that we don't get abused like we have for decades. And I'm very happy to see a lot of conservatives growing up and showing a willingness to learn how the system works, and that's why we're winning now.
It's, from a slightly longer term perspective, it's been interesting to watch. Back in 2012, Ron Paul ran a strong campaign in the Republican primary. He ended up not winning because he's too awesome for that. But he mobilized a lot of young people to get involved in party politics, and that's had cascading effects ever since. Because you get involved in party politics, you become a PC, you become a volunteer. Suddenly, you can move your party in a certain direction. You can pass resolutions. You can pass censures of people who do the wrong thing. You can craft the platform, and the Idaho Republican platform has moved in a very much more conservative direction in the last 10 years than it was before. It's not there's not much neocon nonsense in there. It's all about sound money and liberty and repeal the 16th Amendment, and it's some great stuff. And it's because of those people over the last last 10 or 12 years who have gotten involved. But there's always room for more, and we need more momentum to keep going.
Yeah, that's right. All of our strength right now is built on the precinct strategy. And there's a website still out there, precinctstrategy.com. But it's all was started by activists in Ron Paul's campaign. And all of our strength today in the conservative movement is built upon that strategy.
Ryan, thank you so much for all the work you're doing to keep Idaho conservative. There are very few people who work as hard for free as Ryan Spoon, and I mean that. Ryan and I text all the time. We're strategizing all the time. We're thinking about new things. We're trolling bad people on Twitter all the time. In fact, it's nice to have somebody who talks as much shit on Twitter as I do alongside. That's very much appreciated. I felt about 5 years ago, I felt very alone in this, but now since then, it's you and Lauren and a few others who are very much appreciated. So, any final notes before we let you go?
Yeah, don't tell the liberals that I'm not being paid for this. They are absolutely convinced that I'm becoming wealthy off of everything that I do in politics.
It's weird how there's a lot of projection in there, because
Yes.
one of your main foes is pissed that he doesn't get paid by the Republican Party anymore. So just saying. Ryan Spoon, thank you for joining Freedom Bros, and I hope to have you on again soon.
Yep. Thank you.
Thanks, buddy. Whew. What a show. What a show. Before we leave tonight, Brian is, like I said, the sage over at the Gem State Chronicle, one of my favorite publications. It's cool because a couple years, I'm going to admit something that I don't ever want to speak of again, but the nice thing about Betsy Russell, there's one nice thing about Betsy Russell in the Capitol is that she was constantly tweeting what was going on in the Capitol. And Brian, when she retired, a year and a half ago or whatever, her news was always biased, but at least I had like an idea of what was going on. Brian Allman has kind of filled that hole for me, and in a very good way, because he's actually conservative and not brain dead. So if you don't follow Brian on Twitter, it's at Gem State Brian. But tell me, Brian, what's going on at the Chronicle? What have you written recently? What's coming up for us?
Oh, let's see. Yeah, I've started to realize that I think it really was that I, as a child, I wanted to be a sportscaster calling baseball games and football games, and that's that spilled over into the way I report on politics as well. It is kind of a contact sport, like some of these others. Anyway, today I just did a roundup post. I try to do one of those a week just to catch up on things like this appearance, which so people can see where I've been or what I've been listening to or reading. Yesterday, I did an article about the Amnesty Memorial. There's 2 memorials going through the legislature. The Senate version comes from a business first perspective, saying that the purpose of immigration law is to provide a pipeline of cheap workers for Idaho businesses because apparently Americans don't do those jobs anymore. The House one, which is still waiting for a committee hearing, comes from the perspective that, hey, we have a law that we need to enforce. And once we've enforced that law, then maybe we can talk about, bringing in, guest workers. People have started sending me guest editorials, which is a lot of fun. I'm starting to get on the press release lists and the editorial list. Carrie Hanks, who's running for House in District 31. She sent me a good article about how people use the extremist label to just get people to shut down and not realize that the so-called extremists are really, good, solid, traditional conservative Republicans. A fellow named Bob Schillingstad sent me an editorial yesterday about the teachers union. He had some really interesting stuff coming from the Coeur d'Alene School District. So that's all there. It's all really fascinating stuff. Still trying to track all the bills. I'm a couple days behind just because this last week the legislature has certain deadlines on when you have to get bills submitted to be considered. And in the last week before the deadline, there's just a flurry of bills. You look at the committee hearings this week, and they have a dozen different introductions. So I'm a little bit behind, but I'm trying to catch up. Obviously, the library bill was killed on the Senate floor this afternoon. There's still a few that are running around. There's one interesting thing I've noticed is that they're starting to build up a few on the governor's desk. The fentanyl bill is there. The charter school reform bill is there, and he hasn't signed them yet. I don't expect him to veto anything that's come through so far, but I don't know. Maybe he just has a signing day to get through them all, at the same time. But I don't know. I've never been a governor, so I don't know how that works.
And you will never be one, nor will I, unfortunately. Unfortunately for the people of Idaho.
I have no ambition to be governor. That's it looks like a tough job. You got to manage a massive bureaucracy, and no matter what you do, half the state's going to hate you. So.
There is that. Well, it was a heck of a show. Brian Allman from Gem State Chronicle, New Freedom Bureau. Thank you for joining us. Next week we are going to have a different show next week. We're going to have a sheriff candidate from Gem County join us, and we're going to get back on legislative interviews here soon. I think we need to have. I don't think we've had Carrie Hanks on, who's running against Mr. P. Poop and Period, Red Flag Rod Furnace. So I'll see if I can get her on next week too. But guys, this is a heck of a show. Let us know if there's somebody you want us to interview. The Gem County Sheriff is from one of our loyal listeners. Suggested that we have him on, so we're going to do it. But let us know if there's somebody you want us to interview, and we'll do it.
It doesn't have to be people who are conservative or extremist or whatever. If you're some establishment folk, if Representative Furness wants to come on, then I think we can have a very interesting conversation.
Here's the thing. I love talking to our allies because it provides me with energy and a boost, right? But I would love for somebody who hates me, us, and conservatives to come on. I mean, Trent Clark came on, so I would love for that to happen. So maybe Greg Cheney. Who knows? We'll get lucky. All right, guys, that is it for episode 36 of Freedom Bros. I should even know. I can't even say my own show title. Gosh dang it is late. All right, guys, I'm signing off. Thank you, Brian, and we'll see you guys again next week.